The wedding bells didn't sound like a celebration, they sounded like a funeral toll. I sat on the edge of the mahogany bed, the heavy phoenix coronet weighing my head down until my neck ached. My red veil was thick, smelling of sandalwood and old secrets. Across from me, motionless under the heavy silk quilts, lay the man who was now my husband, General Yang Huijin. They told me I was a blessing. They told me my pure energy would wake the dragon from his slumber. What they meant was that I was a cheap sacrifice. If he wakes, I am his servant. If he dies, I am his widow, buried alive in this manor until my hair turns white. But as the heavy doors clicked shut and the maids withdrew, I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I reached up, ripped off the suffocating veil, and threw it over a nearby lamp. I looked at the legendary general, the man the stories called a cold-blooded killer. He looked less like a killer and more like a very beautiful, very still piece of jade. "Well, General," I whispered, reaching for a plate of wedding cakes meant for the spirits. I took a huge, unladylike bite. "Everyone out there is crying for you. But honestly, if you could just stay like this for another 50 years, that would be great. Your bed is soft, your wine is expensive, and you're the first man I've met who knows how to keep his mouth shut." I leaned closer, my breath hitting his ear. "Don't wake up, Huijin. It's much more peaceful this way." I didn't see the slight twitch of his index finger. I didn't see the way the pulse in his neck jumped. I just reached for another cake. You are listening to a story on Lotus Tale Studios. Wishing you an enjoyable time. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel, and if this story touches your heart, don't forget to like and drop a comment. The morning light in the Yang Manor doesn't dance, it creeps. It slides across the polished rosewood floors like a spy, eventually hitting the heavy, gold-threaded curtains of the general's bedchamber. I woke up on the small cot at the foot of his bed, my back aching from the stiff mattress the dowager insists I use. A bride must show her devotion through sacrifice, she had said, her eyes as cold as a winter pond. I sat up, stretching until my bones popped. I looked at the man on the bed. General Yang Huijin. He hadn't moved an inch. His face was a masterpiece of stillness, high cheekbones, a jawline that could cut silk, and long, dark lashes that cast shadows over his cheeks. He looked like a god carved from marble, and just as silent. "Still here, I see," I muttered, sliding off the cot. I didn't bother with the traditional morning prayer. Instead, I walked over to the washbasin, splashed my face with the scented water meant for him, and sat down right on the edge of his bed. In the eyes of the servants, I am the grieving, pious wife. But the moment those doors close, the mask slips. "You know, Huijin," I said, picking up a jade comb and lazily running it through my messy hair. "Your mother visited me this morning." "Well, she didn't visit me, she visited the lucky charm. She spent 10 minutes complaining that I haven't prayed hard enough. Apparently, your soul is wandering the underworld because I didn't burn the expensive incense correctly." I leaned over him, propping my chin on my hand, staring directly into his closed eyes. "She's a real piece of work, your mother. She's already eyeing the estates in the south. She thinks that if you don't wake up by the spring equinox, she can marry off your younger brother to that viper, Malian, and consolidate the grain trade. You're just a pawn to her, a glorious trophy gathering dust." I reached out and flicked his ear. It was a childish move, but it felt good. "And then there's your loyal lieutenant, General Ju. I saw him in the garden yesterday. He wasn't crying for his fallen leader, he was practicing your signature. I think he's planning to forge a will, my dear husband. Everyone is just waiting for you to stop breathing so they can start carving up your corpse." I let out a long, dramatic sigh and flopped back onto the silk pillows next to his head. "If I were you, I'd stay asleep. Truly. Out here, it's all schemes and sour tea. At least in there, you don't have to listen to Malian talk about her delicate constitution while she eats enough roast duck to feed a cavalry unit." I grabbed a pear from the offering bowl on the nightstand, the fruit of longevity, and took a loud, crunchy bite. These are good. You're missing out. But don't worry, I'll eat your share. It's the least a devoted bride can do." I didn't notice the way the air in the room seemed to thicken. I didn't see the way the veins on his hand, resting atop the quilt, suddenly turned a darker shade of blue as his grip tightened, just for a fraction of a second. "You're the perfect husband, really," I continued, juice dripping down my chin. "You don't talk back, you don't demand heirs, and you don't tell me to be ladylike. If you stay like this, we're going to get along just fine." I spent the rest of the hour describing, in vivid detail, exactly how ugly I thought the ancestral vases in the hallway were. I told him his family's taste in decor was aggressive and that his brother looked like a confused pigeon. I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, someone was listening to me without interrupting. Or so I thought. As I stood up to let the maids in for the morning cleansing, I leaned down and whispered into his ear one last time. "Sleep tight, General. I've got a big day of pretending to miss you ahead of me. It's exhausting work." I turned away, missing the moment his chest rose in a single, ragged breath, the first deep breath he had taken in 12 months. Deep inside the darkness of his coma, Yang Huijin wasn't drowning anymore. He was listening. And for the first time in a year, he wanted to growl. Who was this woman? And where did she get the nerve to call his brother a pigeon? The heavy oak doors of the bedchamber groaned open, and the silence of my private sanctuary was shattered by the clicking of jade ornaments and the scent of bitter herbs. Still no change. The Dowager Yang entered like a winter storm, her silk robes trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. Behind her lurked Cousin Malian, clutching a silk handkerchief to her nose as if the very air of the general's sickroom was beneath her. I immediately dropped to my knees, my head bowed low, the devoted bride mask snapping back into place. "Mother. The general remains peaceful." I spent the entire night chanting the sutras for his recovery. The dowager didn't look at me, she looked at Huijin. She touched his forehead with a cold, ringed hand. Peaceful is just another word for useless. The emperor's patience is wearing thin. If he does not wake soon, the Yang family's command of the northern border will be stripped. She turned her sharp, hawkish gaze toward me. "And you? You look entirely too well rested for a woman whose husband is at death's door. Are you truly praying, Su Ning? Or are you just enjoying the luxury of this house?" "I am merely trying to stay strong to serve him, Mother," I whispered, keeping my eyes on the floor. Malian let out a soft, tittering laugh. "Strong? I heard her talking earlier. I was passing by the window and heard a voice. It sounded like someone was eating." My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the bowl of fruit of longevity on the nightstand. There was a very obvious bite mark in the pear I had left behind. I was offering the essence of the fruit to the general's spirit. I lied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "It is a tradition from my village. To share the meal is to share the life force." The dowager's lip curled in disgust. "Vile peasant superstitions. See that it doesn't happen again. Malian, give him the medicine." Malian stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with a hidden malice. She held a bowl of dark, pungent liquid. In my last life, no, in the rumors I had heard, this medicine was supposed to be a tonic. But as she brought it near, the smell made my stomach turn. It wasn't just herbs. There was a metallic, sharp tang beneath the bitterness. "Wait," I said, my hand moving before I could stop it. I caught Malian's wrist. The room went deathly silent. Malian's eyes widened. "How dare you touch me? The general's pulse is faint today," I said, improvising wildly. "The physician said that if the medicine is too hot, it could shock his heart. Let me test it first." "You." The dowager stepped forward. "You are a lucky charm, not a doctor. Move aside. Mother, if anything happens to him while I am his bride, the ill omen will fall on me," I cried out, putting on my best performance of a terrified, superstitious girl. "Please, let me take the risk for him." I didn't wait for an answer. I took the bowl from Malian's trembling hands. I didn't drink it, I knew better. I leaned over Huijin, pretending to check his temperature, and let the sleeves of my heavy wedding robe dip into the bowl. The fabric soaked up the liquid, and I surreptitiously poured the rest into the thick fur rug beneath the bed while blocked from their view by my own body. "There," I gasped, wiping my mouth as if I'd swallowed it. It is safe. But my heart feels strange. Perhaps the general needs rest now. The ritual requires silence." The dowager looked at me with a mix of suspicion and annoyance. "Fine. We leave. But if he does not show improvement by the full moon, Su-ning, you will be sent to the ancestral temple to shave your head and pray in isolation for the rest of your days. They swept out of the room, Mei-lian casting one last hateful glance at the stain on the rug. Once the doors were locked, I collapsed against the bedpost, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the wet patch on the rug. It was already beginning to sizzle slightly, the fibers turning a dark, scorched brown. "They're poisoning you, Huai-jin," I whispered, my voice trembling now. "That wasn't medicine. That was slow-acting venom. Your own mother, your own family." I looked at his pale face. My pragmatism was warred with a sudden, sharp spark of protective rage. "You really are a pathetic general, aren't you? All those battles won, and you're being defeated by a bowl of soup in your own bedroom." I grabbed his hand. It was cold, but the skin felt electric. "Listen to me, you handsome log. I was going to just rob you blind and leave, but I hate being cheated out of a comfortable retirement. If you die, they'll send me to that temple, and I'm not built for a life of shaved heads and vegetable broth. So, you're going to stay alive. Do you hear me? You're going to stay alive just to spite them." I leaned in closer, my lips almost touching his ear. "And if you wake up, I expect a very large reward for saving your life from that viper Mei-lian. She has terrible breath, by the way. You really dodged a bullet not marrying her." A low, vibrating sound hummed in the room. I froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the servants. It was coming from him. A groan, deep and primal, rolled through his chest. His fingers, which I was still holding, suddenly clamped down on mine with the strength of a drowning man. His eyes didn't open, but his voice, hoarse, cracked, and dry as a desert, rattled through the air. Too loud. My jaw dropped. The pear I was holding in my other hand fell to the floor. You're awake." I breathed. "Pigeon." He wheezed, his grip on my hand tightening until it hurt. "Who looks like a pigeon?" I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been sewed shut with icy thread. I stared down at our joined hands, his bronzed, scarred fingers clamped over my pale skin like a shackle. "You," I stammered, my heart performing a frantic drum roll against my ribs. "You can hear me?" His eyelashes flickered, a slow, agonizing movement like a butterfly struggling to emerge from a cocoon. Then, the veil lifted. His eyes were not the clouded, milky orbs of a dying man. They were dark, piercing, and filled with a terrifyingly sharp intelligence. They were the eyes of a man who had seen 1,000 battlefields and survived them all. Right now, those eyes were fixed on me with a mixture of exhaustion and profound annoyance. "Every word," he rasped. Each syllable sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. "A year of silence, and then you arrive. Like a magpie, with a grudge." I should have been terrified. I should have fallen to my knees and begged for forgiveness for calling him a handsome log or mocking his mother. But the adrenaline was a wildfire in my veins, and my filter had been broken for weeks. "A magpie," I shot back, my voice trembling but sharp. "I'll have you know I'm the only reason you're not currently being digested by the maggots, General. I just dumped a bowl of medicine into your rug that probably could have melted a hole through a shield. You're welcome." His gaze shifted slowly to the rug, where the dark stain was still faintly hissing. His expression darkened, a shadow of the legendary commander flickering across his pale features. The realization hit him not of his own weakness, but of the betrayal he had been fed while trapped in the dark. He tried to sit up, a guttural groan escaping his throat, but his muscles betrayed him. He collapsed back into the pillows, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Don't try to be a hero yet," I snapped, reaching out instinctively to steady his shoulders. "Your body has been a statue for 12 months. You're lucky you can even blink." He looked at my hands on his shoulders, then back up at my face. "You, the Sioux girl. The lucky bride." "The very one," I said, finally pulling my hand back and crossing my arms. "The one you were going to discard. The one who supposedly has pure energy but actually just has a very low tolerance for your family's nonsense." A ghost of a sound escaped his lips. It took me a moment to realize it was a dry, wheezing laugh. "You called my brother a pigeon. He has the neck for it," I muttered, though I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. And he spends half his time pecking at the floor for scraps of your influence. Huai-Jin closed his eyes for a moment, his chest heaving. Water. I scrambled to the table, pouring a cup of the filtered spring water. I returned to the bed, sliding my arm behind his neck to lift his head. It was heavy, solid bone and dormant muscle. As I held the cup to his lips, his gaze stayed locked on mine. There was an intimacy to it that made the room feel far too small. He drank greedily, his throat working as he swallowed. When he finished, he didn't pull away immediately. He leaned his head slightly against my arm, his voice a fraction stronger. Why tell me? You said, you wanted to rob me, and leave. I do, I said, my voice softening despite myself. But I don't like losing. And if you die now, Mei-Lian wins. Your mother wins. And I end up in a temple eating boiled cabbage for the next 40 years. My greed is very closely tied to your survival, General. It's purely practical. He looked at me for a long time, his dark eyes searching mine for a lie. He found none. I wasn't a saint, and I wasn't a spy. I was just a woman who had been backed into a corner and decided to bite back. Practical, he whispered. I like practical. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. The guard was changing, or perhaps the dowager was returning to check if her medicine had finished the job. Stay still, I whispered, my eyes widening. If they know you're awake before you can walk, they'll just finish the job properly. Close your eyes. Go back to being a log. He looked like he wanted to argue, the pride of a lion is a difficult thing to cage, but he saw the logic in my eyes. He let out a long breath and allowed his body to go limp, his eyes shuttering just as the bolt on the door began to slide back. Don't, stop talking, he breathed, so low I almost missed it. I want to hear about the vases, again. I barely had time to tuck the covers around him and scramble back to my kneeling position before the door swung open. The door hit the wall with a dull thud. It was the dowager again, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood the high priest, a man draped in robes of midnight blue, carrying a brass brazier that billowed thick, acrid smoke. The moon has shifted, the dowager announced, her voice echoing like a tolling bell. The high priest senses a disturbance in the general's spirit. He claims the lucky bride may be absorbing too much of his vitality instead of giving her own. I pressed my forehead to the floor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the wood. Disturbance. Of course he sensed a disturbance, the corpse had just called me a magpie and asked for water. Mother, I have done nothing but pray, I muffled my voice into the rug, playing the part of the terrified girl. I have stayed by his side without sleep. Silence, the priest barked. He began to circle the bed, waving the brazier. The smoke was cloying, designed to induce a stupor. I saw a wisp of it drift toward Huai-Jin's face. My stomach twisted. If he coughed, if he even winced, it was over. He is cold, the priest muttered, hovering over Huai-Jin. Too cold. We must use the needle of awakening. If the soul does not return through the crown of the head, we must conclude the vessel is empty and prepare the funeral rites. My blood ran cold. The needle of awakening was a 4-inch spike of silver. They weren't trying to wake him, they were checking to see if they could finally bury him and seize his seals of office. The priest reached into his sleeve and pulled out a long, shimmering needle. He moved it toward the top of Huai-Jin's head. Wait! I cried, lunging forward and grabbing the priest's robes. How dare you, the dowager shrieked. The general. He spoke to me. I sobbed, the tears coming easily out of pure terror. In a dream, just moments ago. He said the smoke makes him lose his way. He told me he needs the scent of the northern pines to find his path back. The priest paused, the needle hovering inches from Huai-Jin's skin. He spoke. To a mere woman. He told me about the pigeon. I blurted out, my mind racing. I looked at the dowager's younger son, who was standing in the doorway. He said his brother must stand guard at the gate to keep the grey birds away, or he cannot return. The dowager's face went pale. The younger brother, looking offended and confused, shifted his weight. For a second, the absurdity of my lie hung in the air like the heavy smoke. Get out, the dowager whispered, her eyes narrow. All of you. Priest, wait in the hall. Suning, If this is a lie to delay the inevitable, I will have your tongue." She swept out, dragging the bewildered priest and the pigeon brother with her. The moment the door clicked, I scrambled onto the bed, fanning the smoke away from Huijian's face with my sleeves. "Are you okay? Did you breathe that in?" I hissed. Huijian's eyes snapped open. He wasn't just awake, he was livid. His hand shot out much faster than before and gripped the front of my robes, pulling me down until our noses almost touched. I expected him to be angry about the needle. I expected him to be shaken. Instead, his lips twitched. A dark, low rumble started in his chest. He was laughing. "The scent of northern pines," he wheezed, his eyes dancing with a wicked, cold fire. You are a magnificent liar, Suning. I saved your skull from a silver spike." I whispered, shouted, trying to pry his hand off my collar. "And you're laughing? You're a psychopath." "I am a general," he corrected, his voice gaining a terrifyingly smooth edge. "I know a good strategy when I hear one. But northern pines? I hate the smell of pine. It reminds me of the winter I spent eating bark to survive." He let go of my robes, but his gaze didn't leave mine. He reached up, his fingers trembling slightly as he brushed a stray hair from my forehead. His touch was no longer cold, it was searing. "Why do you keep doing it?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, intimate hum. "You could have let him drive the needle in. I would be dead, and you could have stolen the jade seal in my desk and been halfway to the border by dawn." I looked at him, really looked at him. Under the bravado and the sharp tongue, I saw a man who had been utterly alone in the dark for a year, surrounded by people who wanted him gone. "I told you," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "I don't like losing. And besides, who else would listen to me talk about how much I hate your family's curtains?" Huijian's hand moved from my hair to the back of my neck, pulling me just an inch closer. "Stay," he commanded. It wasn't the command of a general to a soldier. It was the plea of a man to his only ally. "Tell me more. Tell me about the grey birds at the gate. I want to know everything you've seen while I was gone." I sat back on my heels, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through my mask. "Fine. But if I'm staying, you're eating. I'm not the only one who needs to be practically alive." I reached for a hidden stash of steamed buns I'd swiped from the kitchens. As he took a shaky bite, I began to tell him exactly what I thought of the high priest's eyebrows. He didn't just listen. For the first time in a year, Yang Huijian smiled. And that was when I realized the general wasn't just waking up. He was preparing for war. For the next 3 days, we lived in a state of high-stakes theater. By day, I was the tragic, wilting bride, emerging from the room only to beg for more spiritual offerings, which were actually protein-rich broths and medicinal roots I smuggled in my wide sleeves. By night, I became a drill sergeant. "Left hand, move it. Now the right," I whispered, bracing my shoulder against his back as he sat up. Huijian grunted, sweat beads rolling down his temple. His strength was returning with a ferocity that frightened me. The handsome log was becoming a mountain of living muscle again. "You're pushing too hard," he panted, his arm shaking as he practiced the motion of drawing a sword with a heavy bronze candlestick. "The full moon is in 2 nights, Huijian," I countered, rubbing his cramped calves with aromatic oils. "The dowager won't wait for a miracle twice. If you can't stand by the time they return with that needle, I'm booking a one-way carriage to the mountains and leaving you to the pigeon brother." He paused, looking down at me. I was sitting on the floor at his feet, my hair disheveled, my expensive silk wedding robes stained with soup and oil. I looked nothing like a general's wife, and everything like a conspirator. "Why the mountains?" he asked suddenly, his voice now deep and steady. "With the gold you've surely tucked away from my nightstand, you could buy a villa in the capital." "The capital is too loud," I said, focusing on a particularly tight knot in his muscle. "I want a garden where I can grow what I want, talk as loud as I want, and never, ever have to see a red wedding veil again." He reached down, his large hand covering mine, stopping my movements. "A garden," he repeated. "I'll remember that." The moment was shattered by a frantic scratching at the door. It was my maid, the only one I had managed to bribe with a pair of gold earrings. "The dowager," she hissed through the wood. "She's coming. And she has the imperial physician with her." My blood turned to ice. An imperial physician wouldn't be fooled by stories of northern pines. He would check the pulse. He would see the medicine on the rug. Under the covers, I hissed, shoving Huijin down. Act dead. Act extra dead. I've had a year of practice, he muttered, sliding into the blankets just as the door was thrown open. This time, the dowager didn't look annoyed, she looked triumphant. Beside her was a wizened man with a silver beard and the emperor's crest on his robes. And behind them, Malian, holding a tray with a single, small vial. The emperor is concerned for his favorite general, the dowager said, her voice dripping with fake piety. He has sent physician Wang to perform the final rite of the 7 stars. If there is no response, the general will be declared dead by sunset, and his soul released. Declared dead. They were going to force the transition of power today. The physician approached the bed. I stood my ground, blocking him. The general had a strong reaction to the last medicine. He needs rest. Step aside, girl, the physician said, his voice like dry parchment. He reached for Huijin's wrist. I watched, breathless. Huijin's pulse was likely racing from the exercise. If the physician felt that thundering heart, he'd know. As the physician's fingers touched Huijin's skin, I did the only thing I could think of. I fainted. I let out a dramatic, strangled cry and collapsed directly onto the physician, knocking him sideways. The vial in Malian's hand flew into the air, shattering against the bedpost. You clumsy fool, the dowager screamed. I am so sorry, I sobbed from the floor, clutching the physician's robes. The spirit. I felt a cold wind. The general's spirit is leaving. I saw it. Enough of this theater, Malian shrieked, her face contorted with rage. She's been stalling for days. Mother, look at the rug. Look at the food she hides. She's not a bride, she's a thief. Malian lunged forward, grabbing me by the hair to drag me away from the bed. Get up and face your execution, you peasant. She yanked hard. I gasped in pain, my head snapping back. And then, the world stopped. A hand, huge, scarred, and trembling with a year's worth of suppressed rage, reached out from the silken quilts. It didn't grab Malian's hand. It grabbed her throat. The scream Malian was about to let out died in a pathetic gurgle. The corpse sat up. Huijin's eyes were open, burning like twin suns. He looked at Malian with the absolute coldness of a reaper. You, he rasped, his voice echoing in the sudden, terrified silence of the room. You dare lay a hand on my wife in my presence? The dowager fell to her knees, not in joy, but in sheer, paralyzed horror. The physician scrambled backward, tripping over his own robes. Huijin turned his gaze to his mother, his grip on Malian tightening just enough to make her eyes bulge. Mother, he said, the word sounding like a curse. I heard you liked the southern estates. Perhaps you should start packing. Because as of this moment, I am very much awake. And I have a very long list of grievances to settle. He looked down at me, still sitting on the floor in a heap. The terrifying light in his eyes softened for a heartbeat. Get up, Su Ning, he commanded, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. We have a family meeting to attend. And I believe you have some things to say about the curtains. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like drowning. Malian's face had turned a sickly shade of violet before Huijin finally released her. She collapsed into a heap, gasping for air, her delicate constitution finally failing her for real. Huijin didn't spare her a second glance. With a slow, deliberate grace that defied his year of stagnation, he swung his legs over the side of the bed. He was pale, yes, but standing there in nothing but his inner white robes, he looked like a vengeful spirit returned to claim his kingdom. Huijin, my son. The dowager's voice was a pathetic tremor. She tried to reach out, to play the role of the relieved mother, but Huijin stepped back, his eyes narrowing. Do not, he said. The single word carried the weight of a mountain. Physician Wang, you will find the remains of the medicine your associates provided in the fibers of this rug. I suggest you examine it carefully before the Imperial Guard examines you. The physician turned tail and fled, his dignity trailing behind him like a tattered flag. Huijin turned to me. I was still on the floor, my heart doing backflips. He reached down, offering me his hand. His palm was calloused, warm, and steady. When I took it, he pulled me up, not to my feet, but right to his side, his arm wrapping firmly around my waist to support both of us. "We are going to the Great Hall," he announced. "General, you're barely standing," I whispered, leaning into him so the others couldn't see how much he was relying on me for balance. "Then walk with me, Su Ning," he murmured into my ear, his breath tickling my skin. "You said you wanted to see them lose. Don't miss the show." The walk to the Great Hall was a slow-motion execution. Servants dropped their trays, guards fell to their knees in shock as the Ghost General walked past them, supported by his lucky bride. We reached the hall just as the Pigeon brother and the clan elders were discussing the division of the Northern Command. They sat around a map of the Empire, vultures picking at a lion's skin while the lion was still warm. Huai Jin kicked the heavy doors open. The sound was like a thunderclap. "I hear there's a vacancy in my office," Huai Jin's voice boomed, projecting the strength he was barely holding on to. The elders scrambled. The younger brother fell out of his chair. "Brother, you're disappointed." Huai Jin finished for him, stepping into the light of the central hearth. He looked at the map, then at the elders. "In the last year, taxes from my lands have tripled, yet the border rations have been cut in half. My mother has purchased 3 villas in the south, and my brother has acquired a stable of racing horses that cost more than a battalion's wages." He let go of my waist for a moment, standing tall on his own. He looked at me, a silent signal. I stepped forward, pulling a small, crumpled ledger from my sleeve, the one I'd been secretly compiling from the loose papers I'd found while cleaning his study. "And," I added, my voice clear and sharp, "the auspicious wedding was funded by selling the general's ancestral medals to a black market dealer in the capital. I have the receipts." The hall erupted in hushed, terrified whispers. The dowager entered then, her face a mask of desperation. "Huai Jin, it was for the family. We thought you were gone." "I was never gone," Huai Jin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "I was right there, listening to every word, every scheme, every insult thrown at the woman who actually kept me alive while you all tried to bury me." He turned to the guards, men who had bled with him in the trenches. "The Dowager and Lady Malian are to be escorted to the ancestral estate in the mountains. They will live on the vegetable broth my wife mentioned so often. My brother will be sent to the front lines as a common foot soldier. Perhaps a year in the mud will help him find his spine." As they were dragged out, screaming and pleading, Huai Jin finally let his shoulders sag. He leaned heavily on the command table, his face turning grey. "Huai Jin." I caught him, my arms wrapping around his chest. He looked down at me, a tired, genuine smile touching his lips. "Did I do it right, Su Ning? Was the pigeon reference appropriate?" I laughed, the tears finally blurring my vision. "Perfectly timed, General. Absolutely perfectly timed." "Good," he whispered, closing his eyes. "Now, about that garden in the mountains. I think I'd like to see it." The great hall slowly emptied, the stunned officials and terrified servants dispersing like smoke. Huai Jin's weight was heavy against me, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion he'd fought for days. I supported him back to his bedchamber, the silence between us now a comfortable hum rather than a tense void. I helped him shed his outer robes, his movements stiff and slow. He sank onto the bed, not with the inert collapse of a man in a coma, but with the weary grace of a warrior laying down his shield. I fetched a basin of warm water and a clean cloth, tending to him as a wife should, but this time, without the bitter resentment. "You should rest," I murmured, gently wiping the dust and grime from his face. "You pushed yourself too hard." He caught my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I had to. Before they carved up my entire legacy." His eyes, though still tired, held a spark of something new, a vulnerable curiosity. You helped me. Why?" I paused, looking at his reflection in the water, then back at his earnest face. "I told you. I didn't want to lose my comfortable retirement. And, you were less annoying than your family." He let out a low chuckle, a rich, full sound that was a world away from the wheezing gasps of just days ago. "Less annoying? Is that the highest compliment you can bestow upon your husband, Su Ning?" "It's a high compliment coming from me, General," I retorted, but there was no bite in my tone. I dipped the cloth again, moving to clean a small cut on his temple, a remnant of the battlefield, not the palace. My real name is Huijin, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. You can use it. My hand froze. Huijin, I repeated, the name feeling foreign and intimate on my tongue. And mine is Ning. Just Ning. He watched me, his gaze unblinking. Ning. So, about this garden. In the mountains. With no red veils. Tell me more. I found myself smiling, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. It's a small place, far from the city. With a stream that runs clear, and peach blossoms in the spring. No one would care if I wore trousers or if I spoke my mind. I'd have a little library, filled with forgotten stories. And I'd grow herbs, not for medicine, but for tea. And no one would ask me to pray for a sleeping general. No one, he asked, a teasing glint in his dark eyes. What if the general decided to visit? I shrugged, turning to wring out the cloth. He'd have to bring his own tea leaves. And he'd have to promise not to order anyone around. And he'd have to listen to me complain about the weeds. He reached out, catching my wrist gently. I think, he said, pulling me closer until I was sitting on the edge of the bed beside him, I think I could live with those terms. The air between us was thick with unspoken possibilities. The marriage had been a farce, a ritual. But in the crucible of his silent suffering and my loud defiance, something real had begun to forge. He shifted, turning to face me fully. His hand moved from my wrist to cup my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. The touch sent a shiver through me, a warmth spreading through my veins that had nothing to do with the heated water. You saved my life, Ning, he said, his voice low and serious. Not with your pure energy, but with your sharp tongue and your sharp mind. For a year, I was trapped in darkness, a prisoner in my own body. Your voice, you were the only light. The only sound that wasn't a lie. My breath hitched. He wasn't just talking about the physical act of saving him. He was talking about the loneliness, the betrayal, the isolation he'd endured. He was seeing me. I just wanted to survive, I whispered, my gaze dropping to his strong hand on my cheek. And you did, he said, tilting my chin up so our eyes met again. And now, so will I. But not alone. Not anymore. His gaze held mine, intense and unyielding, yet filled with a tenderness that made my cynical heart flutter. He leaned in, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. His lips touched mine, a soft, hesitant press at first, then deepening with a raw, undeniable hunger. It wasn't the kiss of a stranger, nor the kiss of a man claiming his property. It was the kiss of a man who had returned from the brink, finding solace and fire in the one person who had dared to see him as human. It was the kiss of two people who had found unexpected refuge in the most unlikely of places, a golden cage, beside a handsome log who had been listening all along. The mountains of the north are never truly quiet. There is the whistle of the wind through the pines, the rush of the meltwater stream, and, more recently, the sound of a woman arguing with a very stubborn goat. I stood in the center of my garden, my sleeves rolled up and my hands stained with the dark, rich earth of the valley. A year had passed since the great hall fell silent, and the lucky bride became a legend that the capital still whispered about over sour plum wine. I told you, the fence needs to be higher, I called out, not looking back. He's already eaten half the medicinal mint. The fence is standard military height, Ning. That goat is simply a tactical genius, a deep, amused voice responded. I turned to see Huijin leaning against the gate of our small stone villa. He no longer looked like a marble statue or a ghost. The color had returned to his skin, bronzed by the mountain sun, and his shoulders had regained the breadth that once made him the empire's shield. He wore simple linen robes, his long hair tied back with a piece of scrap silk. He looked happy. Truly happy. After the purge of the Yang clan, the emperor had tried to force Huijin back into the capital to take the seat of the Grand Marshal. But Huijin had simply handed over his seal of office, claimed his death was a sign from the heavens, and requested a modest pension and a quiet retirement in the north. He had fulfilled my dream of a garden, but he had insisted on being the one to build the fence. The pigeon brother sent a letter, Huijin said, walking toward me and handing me a cup of tea brewed from the very leaves I had taught him to dry. I wiped my hands on my apron. Oh, has he learned how to march without tripping over his own shadow yet? He's been promoted to sergeant, Huijin chuckled. It seems the frontier suited him. He's thinner, humbler, and apparently, he's terrified of ever seeing a bird again. He thinks they're bad omens. I laughed, taking a sip of the tea. It was perfect. And your mother? Huijin's expression softened into a quiet, resigned peace. The ancestral temple is quiet. She spends her days copying sutras. I sent the physician who helped us, the real one, to ensure she stays healthy. She is a woman of the past now. We are the people of the present. We sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks. There were no golden curtains here, no poisoned broths, and no phoenix coronets to weigh down my head. You never did tell me, Huijin said, his arm sliding around my waist, drawing me into his side. On that first night, when you thought I couldn't hear you, why did you stay? Before the greed, before the survival, why didn't you just run when you saw the window was unlocked? I looked at him, at the man who had been my captive audience, my protector, and eventually, the beat of my own heart. Because, I whispered, leaning my head on his shoulder. I noticed your eyelashes were too long for a man, and I thought it would be a waste to let such a pretty face be buried without someone to tell it how arrogant it looked. Huijin laughed, the sound echoing through the valley, bright and free. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. I'm glad you stayed, my magpie. Even if you still haven't stopped complaining about the decor. I looked out at our mountain home, the air sweet with the scent of pine and freedom. The lucky bride had indeed brought a miracle back to the world, not through magic or superstition, but through the simple, honest power of a voice that refused to be silenced. Justice had been served, the lion had found his peace, and the magpie finally had a nest that was all her own. Tell me which moment shocked you the most or touched your heart the deepest. Your comments mean the world to me, they help me keep creating more stories like this. Please like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps Lotus Tale Studios alive. See you in the next story.